Hello there, I'm Ellie. And
I'm Paige.
And this podcast is called WTF is AuDHD. Now, we were diagnosed late and we're here to educate. And this podcast is basically a podcast for anyone and everyone. But we wanted to do it for people who might think they have autism or ADHD, which, by the way, is the combined name of that. We have both, autism and ADHD, which is called AuDHD. So we wanted to start this podcast because we were both diagnosed late and there's not been a lot of research for people, especially women, and people who aren't fitting the white male kind of stereotype, I guess. And so we wanted to start this podcast to share our experiences because apparently it's quite helpful for others to learn from others' experiences, which is what I did anyway. I learned a lot from other people first before I really started identifying that I might have one or the other. Why did you want to do this podcast, Podge?
I had many reasons, but I think realizing how much my life changed when I was diagnosed and medicated. Medication's not very around, I know, but it worked for me and my life kind of, got a lot better in leaps and bounds,
Yeah.
And it's one of those things that you don't realize how much it's impacted you until you know and until you find a medication that works for you and you kind of go, holy shit, is that what normal people feel like? Normal. Yeah, sorry, quotation, stupid word. Because what is normal? And so that's one reason to help people that are also struggling, because I know what it's like to struggle and not know what's wrong and you beat yourself up. And so, helping people. And obviously, yes, there's not a lot of research done on women with ADHD and autism.
Mm-hmm.
So, shedding light on our experiences and how we, I think, are not stereotypical. And so, we're not the stereotypical version of ADHD or autistic, but
We also, I don't know if we've mentioned this yet, but we are sisters. And we thought that would be a really interesting perspective for people to hear from two sisters who are, I'm 32, Paige is 29. And we are so different, yet we both have AuDHD. And we just wanted to show and highlight that even if you come from the same family, the manifestations can look completely different. And we don't fit all of those stereotypes. So this podcast is basically going to be a place where you'll hear about our journey. We'll give you some of our own pointers. Obviously, this is like only our perspective, and we are two white, straight women from New Zealand. We're privileged. We know that. So you may not relate to our experience, but we're hoping that there might be some people that do, and you might start recognizing it in yourself. Or even like you might know someone that you think, once you've listened to us, you might realize maybe they have one or the other or both. And the reason we wanted to do the AuDHD combination especially is because there's not a lot of research on the combo. Obviously, ADHD and autism have been around for a while, but it wasn't until 2013 in the DSM-5, which is the book that basically diagnoses mental conditions, that they actually said that AuDHD could be a diagnosis. Before that, it was either one or the other. You either had ADHD or autism, and they would diagnose you with the one that they deemed had more of an impact on your life. But now, you can get diagnosed with both.
Yeah, I see this podcast as a place for people to relate to us and build a little community so that people like us feel seen, because I know it can feel very lonely when you kind of feel different and you don't know why, and you beat yourself up and why am I like this? And so having a little community, for people to relate to each other and feel seen, and especially because AuDHD it's invisible to others. So it's not an obvious broken leg or something.
Yeah.
So, making you realize that if you relate to us and you struggle with these things, that you could also be, and that it's okay, and that don't let people tell you that you're not, or tell you what your experience is. Yeah, like they try to tell you, no, you're not.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I honestly, if you're listening to this and thinking, everyone's just getting diagnosed with this now, it doesn't mean that we're all just deciding to label ourselves. It's actually a really sad thing that so many people haven't been diagnosed up until this point, and now with education through the internet, etc., we're all realizing, oh, that's what that thing is. That's why I think that way. And I think we should be celebrating that as opposed to everyone's
ADHD these days.
But that's a good thing, is it not? It's like we're recognizing it, and we didn't have the research before, and now we have the knowledge, and it's been really helpful for both of us. So you might be wondering, why should you listen to us? Why should you listen to this podcast and trust our perspective? Well, first of all, we don't necessarily think you have to listen to this. It's more just like if you listen to us and you relate to our experience, or you know someone who might relate to our experience, we just hope it might be helpful. And we just wanted to get it on paper, and, well, not on paper, but in audio form.
And people who don't find this helpful, well, you are not our audience.
Yeah, exactly.
No offense.
We want to be here for people who feel a bit lonely or are trying to work it out for themselves, because like we said, we felt a bit lonely. We had all these answers that were given to us when we got the diagnosis. So I guess for this episode here, we're just going to kind of introduce ourselves, keep talking about why we're doing this, and then look ahead to what we'll bring later on in further episodes. But it'll be once a week, and I guess, do you want to start off, Paige, by telling us who you are?
I'm Paige. I'm 29, nearly 30.
Is that it?
That is it.
No.
Who am I?
What do you do? Like, what makes you hum and buzz?
Are you going to say Turk?
No, what? Hey, that's a good start.
Great segue. So I'm Paige. I'm 29, nearly 30, as I said. I'm a graphic designer. So, yeah, I'm very artsy and fartsy, literally. And, yeah, no, that's funny that Ellie just said that. That brings me to another point. I obviously have ADHD. I actually haven't been officially diagnosed with autism, but based on what I know, my research and everything, and Ellie being diagnosed and through her, and knowing what my childhood was like, what I was like, everything.
We're pretty sure. Like, even when you were what? How old were you when you found that book in the library?
Oh, yes, that's a great point. So when I was, we read a book at school in primary or intermediate, it might have been. And it was about a boy with Asperger's. And if you don't know, Asperger's syndrome is now considered under the umbrella of autism, right? Or it always was. Or they just consider Asperger's now as autism. So I read this book about a boy with Asperger's, and I had never related to something so much in my life. It was like I'd been seen. I had this epiphany. I was like, oh my goodness, this is like this is me. Like, this is my whole life. Explains everything. And I could never ever put it into words when I was a kid, but also I felt different. I didn't know why. I felt misunderstood, so many different things. And I read it and I was like, oh my gosh. I went home to mum and dad and I said, Mum, oh my goodness, I think I have Asperger's. I read this book, blah, blah, blah. And the thing is, someone that doesn't have autism would read that book and not bat an eyelid.
Yeah.
And I really, it just explained my entire life. And so, and that brings me to the next point, is that I actually have Tourette's, non-verbal, obviously. So I am, I guess you could say, I don't want to say one of the lucky ones, but a little bit. That would be, I understand what tics are like, and they're awful. And so having the verbal side, it's just awful, an awful thing to live with. So I also live with this. If you know me well, I think you'll know this. And that's also been quite debilitating in my life to live with. And it's something that's not often spoken about in society or anything. The only time it really is spoken about is when someone's taking the piss out of it. Yeah. Which is just disheartening. So when Mum took me to a neurologist for tics, because I had tics. Cheers. This is the other thing about ADHD, where you like to over-explain. Yeah, I'll over-explain and hone in on a point. So, she took me to a neurologist and sat down and, Mum explained the sitch. And then the neurologist goes, well, that's easy. I know exactly what you've got. You've got Tourette's. And I literally shot back at the lady. No, I don't. Because I was a little shit.
No, you weren't a little shit, though. We then figured out what was going on with you in other ways. But, yes.
Yeah, so...
You were fiery.
I was fiery, and I was my own person. Let's just say that. No, society was not going to tell me where I sat or what I was,
Yeah.
So, I got told that I had Tourette's, and I said, no, I don't. And then the neurologist sort of goes, okay, no, you don't, because she knew what's the point in fighting it, because I'm a kid, and I clearly wasn't happy with hearing that, and there is no cure yet for Tourette's, so what's the point in even trying to, So that was when I didn't know if I got an official diagnosis in that case, because it'll be on my file. But yeah. So so I live with that.
Yeah. And that's so sad at that age, you get told you have something, a label, let's say, and your immediate reaction is to reject it, which just is the whole point of this podcast in a way, is to show that like these conditions we have are not a bad thing. They're actually just the way our brain works. They're just different to others, and it's okay to have these things.
Yeah.
And it's just sad at that age you were already rejecting that diagnosis and didn't want to be a part of it. And also the fact that you came home that day with that Asperger's book, and no one thought to sort of take that further. Yeah, and in my opinion, you have always actually displayed quite autistic.
Yeah.
Now that I know about it.
Yeah.
And you definitely displayed potentially more autistic than me, maybe. But that's an outward thing, though, because there's the inward thing too, which we'll obviously get into these in all sorts of different episodes. But yeah, so you're Paige, you're 29, you're a graphic designer, amazing artist. She's been a great artist since she was a child, since 2. Crazy. And yes, you've got officially diagnosed ADHD. We know that you have autism. And on that claim...
I'm sorry to interrupt, but I know deep down. And when you know, and you've done your research and you're relating to this thing so freaking hard.
Yeah.
If someone turns around and says, oh, you're not officially diagnosed, I might smack you.
Yeah.
When you know, and when you've done so much research, also that's obsessive behavior. I have researched and I've related, and it actually explains why I have felt so different my whole life, and I've never understood what it was, why I felt that way, and that all the signs point to that.
Yeah.
And also ADHD and autism are quite commonly
comorbid,
and so is Tourette's.
I just want to go back to the Asperger's point, just in terms of the Asperger's thing. It's really interesting. That was actually a condition that was named in World War II, and it was named by a guy who was working in sort of Hitler's group. It was in Germany, and essentially what Asperger's was it was named after the person. I can't remember his first name, but it was essentially distinguishing between high functioning and low functioning autism. And it essentially meant if you were diagnosed with Asperger's, you could still go and be a helpful contributor to war, society, etc. And if you had autism, you were kind of deemed But now they've realized that it's just actually the same thing. And because with autism, there's levels 1, 2, and 3. And level 1 is your essentially low support needs, which again is something we'll get into another episode, because even that is an interesting concept. But I'm level 1. And yeah, there's just there's so much detail we'll get into in later episodes, but this episode here is more just getting to know who we are and what we do.
I'm bursting at the seams. Everything that you're saying, I'm having thoughts just firing in my brain of wanting to say it, but I'm trying to withhold because we need some structure. We need some structure here. And also this episode is just about getting to know us, and then we're going to get into all that later.
Yeah, so. We will. Should we, this might also bounce around ironically, because it's to people with ADHD. ADHD is essentially attention deficit hyperactive disorder, which is the name of it. But in my opinion, that name is so wrong and is outdated and probably needs to be changed, because it makes it sound like ADHD people lack attention, but it's actually not the case. We have too much attention and we don't know where to put the attention. So the name in itself is just wrong. And then autism is defined as a neurodevelopmental condition of variable severity with lifelong effects that can be recognized from early childhood, characterized by difficulties with social interaction and communication, and by restricted or repetitive patterns of thought and behavior. And even that meaning is really interesting, because
I didn't quite catch that because I suffer from auditory processing, and that just sounded like hand-winning. Sorry.
There's a lot of theories of autism, so we'll get into that another day, because there's so many players, and we need to break it down for people like Paige, who struggles to not even listen. It's the processing between the audio reaching your ear and then your brain processing it.
Yeah, just an example. Who does this? Where someone says something to you and you go, pardon? And before they can answer, but 3 seconds later you go, oh, sorry, blah, 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 blah. And they're like, I thought you didn't hear me.
Yeah.
And it's not because I didn't hear you. It's because it literally takes a few seconds for my brain to like absorb what you're saying.
Yeah, exactly. So those are kind of very vague definitions of autism and ADHD, and we'll get to those in later episodes. I'm Ellie. I am 32. Currently, I'm a radio producer, producing a breakfast show. I'm also a podcast host for another podcast called Extremely Casual Gamers.
Podcast award-winning podcast producer.
Thank you. I have won a few awards for my podcast production and hosting. Most recently, actually, my friend Britt and I just won Best Non-Fiction Podcast at New Zealand Web Fest, and our podcast was about ADHD, and our show that we created called ADHD and Me. If you do want to go and watch that, it's a narrative series on Viva La Dirt League's YouTube channel, and we did a podcast that was a companion to that. If you do want to listen to that as like an entry-level kind of ADHD chat, feel free to go watch that. So we've won awards for that at Sydney Web Fest and New Zealand Web Fest. I love my cats. I study psychology, so I've always had a really keen interest in mental health and the way the brain works. And I think also me studying psychology was ironically me trying to figure out who I was and why my brain worked the way it did, because I felt quite lonely.
Your special interest is people and working out how their brains work because you weren't sure how yours worked. You literally just said that. Sorry.
No, it's all right. No, exactly. And that's why I didn't ever get no one ever thought I had autism or ADHD because I didn't present outwardly that way to the stereotypes.
No, she's tortured in the brain, essentially.
Yeah, it made my mental health suffer, is what I'll say. And that's, again, why we're doing this podcast, because we don't want people to have poor mental health when they don't actually realize that the root cause could simply be you're neurodivergent. Yeah. And neurodivergence is genuinely just a different way that your brain is wired. It is not a mental health condition. It is just a neurodivergent way that your brain is divergent from the norm. ADHD is essentially a lack of dopamine in the brain, which is the motivation chemical, which is why we struggle to do things that we're not interested in. We're novelty seekers. We are only interested in things we're interested in. And if we are told to fold our washing, we will wait until the last second to do that washing until it's, life or death, or someone's coming over, or there's a deadline, whatever. That's me to a T. I procrastinate.
Yeah. This is the reason for the either hyperfocus or lack of focus, because it's really all riding on the dopamine we had for that task. So if there's literally no dopamine at all to go do the washing, like I actually heard the other day as well, that dopamine is actually responsible in some way responsible for initiating physical movement.
Oh, yeah.
Actually physical.
Yeah, it is.
Like in some way, it's not just because you don't want to do it.
No.
It's actually inhibiting you because dopamine helps you with your muscle.
Yeah, it's just moving and doing things. It's literally the motivation chemical to make your brain do what it needs to do. So because we're lacking in that from the baseline, it makes tasks that we're not interested in really hard. But then things that we love, we can actually get quite obsessed with because it's dopamine seeking.
Yeah.
And we then can get easily addicted to substances, which we'll definitely get into another episode because I personally have suffered from substance abuse. And I think it's a really important thing to talk about. We'll also talk about in this podcast masking, and masking is basically, it's a subconscious behavior where you are fitting into society by changing who you are. You don't even realize you're doing it. And I've realized my whole life I've been masking. And I actually used to say, why am I performing? Why do I feel like I'm performing? And then I learned what masking was, and I got my 2 diagnoses, and I was like, there it is.
And generally speaking, women are great maskers. And so that's how Ellie just got through, how you got through school and uni, and also
just under the radar completely
under the radar. And this is the thing, and this is actually the main, I think, one of my main reasons why this podcast is so important. I may have said it before, but that because it can be so inward, we're not always going to be that 5-year-old boy at school that's like standing on the tables and jumping off the tables. That was a bit me, really.
You're a bit like that.
I was a bit like that. Not at school, though, because I was scared of authority. So I still was sensible at school. But at home, holy shit.
Wow.
Yeah, so it's not all, because it can be so all in your brain and therefore invisible to the outside. Someone can be so successful because, we're intelligent and talented, and so you don't get picked up. And then you just spend your whole life with terrible anxiety and then you get, given anxiety medication by your doctor and it doesn't work. I know I've heard from a lot of women that they are now diagnosed ADHD and they got given anti-anxiety meds and they didn't work.
That's me.
That was Ellie. And
it's because the root cause hadn't been found yet.
Yeah, it's because the root cause, if you think about I'm not an expert obviously, but like anxiety is a symptom.
Yes, like essentially it's a reaction to some external stimulus.
Yeah.
Stressing you out.
Yeah.
It's a fight or flight response in a way.
Yeah, so instead of like trying to treat the anxiety, that's not treating the cause. So this medication won't work for these people.
I'd been squeezing a fidget toy this whole time and it has just exploded on me.
You were squeezing that so hard, bro. What do you think was going to happen?
I don't know, but
I was actually going to mention it.
So this is like a sensory nightmare now for my fucking autism. Like, I'll just put that there.
Don't wash your hands.
She'll be right, mate. Oh my gosh. Lost the train of thought.
I just
saying.
So that's the main reason for me is like I really want to get the message out there that like autism and ADHD is not always what you think it is, and the stereotypes we've been told it is not necessarily true for everyone. And just because you have a belief or someone has a belief of what they think autism or ADHD is, that does not mean that they defines your definition of autism and ADHD, because it manifests in so many different ways.
Yeah,
especially. Yeah, I don't know if I can forget what I was saying.
No, that's fine. But, again, a great display of ADHD in motion. I was 28 when I was diagnosed with ADHD and then 31 when I was diagnosed with autism. How old were you when you were diagnosed with ADHD?
I think around 26. It was around 2020. 2021.
Yeah. So we were late diagnosed. We spent up to 26 and 28 just like scrambling, drowning, but getting through life and still looking like we're successful.
Well, life was happening to us. We weren't. What was it?
Yeah.
Your dad saying?
Life was happening to us. We weren't happening to life. Is that what it was?
I don't know.
No, we're not.
No.
But
wait, does life happen to you or do you take life by the balls?
Yeah.
I don't know. Something like that. And life was happening to us and we were just kind of trying to tread water.
But yes, ADHD and autism are both hereditary. They do come from family members. We did get our ADHD from our dad, but we will get into that in another episode. Next episode, we're going to talk about like what we were like before diagnosis and how we both grew up, how we manifested, how different we were, and then what eventually led to our diagnosis and then how we got diagnosed. So yeah, there's a lot to cover and my brain is just full of stuff because I just want to get all of this out in one go, but we need to just like hold it back.
This is really hard. Like, we just want to info dump everything. Classic neurodivergent thing. And I've got so many thoughts firing every time you say something. I'm like, oh, yeah, that. And I was like, no. But yeah, no. Try to control it.
No, this episode is just about who we are, what we're doing, and why. And hopefully you might find something helpful from that diagnosis process because it's different for everyone. And like Paige said before, she hasn't been officially diagnosed with autism. However, in my opinion, self-identifying is so valid because not everyone's going around saying that they've got autism or ADHD. Like, no one's actually going around and doing that unless there's a reason for it. And we have spent hours and days and years researching this stuff.
And like relating to it so hard. And so if you're finding yourself doing the same thing, like there's got to be a reason for that.
Yeah.
A neurotypical person isn't spending hours of their time doing all this research on it because they clearly don't relate to it.
Yeah.
So, and I think self-identification is very important because
diagnosis is a privilege.
Diagnosis is a privilege and it's expensive. It's
so expensive. But again, we'll get to that in episode 3.
We're just teasing out here.
Tease. We also want to disclaim, obviously, we're not doctors. Like, we have not studied for years at this. However, because of the rate at which we're learning stuff in society through the internet and all that kind of stuff, sometimes people's lived experience can be more accurate than what a doctor might observe on you. And I'm not discriminating against medical field at all, but a lot of the time it's been neurotypical doctors diagnosing these conditions who have not actually lived through the experience. And so we're not saying we know more than them, but we definitely have more of a lived experience and how it's actually manifested in our lives. And there's actually research now that says that people with neurodivergence of any type, and that can also be OCD. There's all sorts of types of neurodivergence. It's not just these 3 that we're talking about. there's research saying that people prefer learning from their peers in regards to these conditions because everyone's experience is different. And there's a quote that says, if you've met one autistic person, you've met one autistic person because everyone manifests differently. It's different. You can't apply the same things to everyone because it all manifests completely differently based on your environment, your upbringing, your intelligence,
your privilege,
or lack
of.
Exactly. Like there's just so many things going on here. But yeah, we're doing this podcast genuinely because we want to try and help people. This is an independent podcast where it's just two sisters sitting in this office, which we've made a rogue set out of.
I think we did a pretty good job.
Yeah, it's not bad. It's not bad.
We want to help people like you who are like us, who struggled for so many years. And, you know, obviously we're here now, but we want you to have, we're lucky. Ellie and I are lucky because we have each other. And I know there's a lot of people out there that don't have siblings, or if they do, they don't necessarily relate to each other on this. And so having two sisters that have gone through the same thing and to help you and build a community to talk about this stuff, because it can be a very lonely place. I'll speak that from my experience.
Yeah. I always appeared like I wasn't lonely because I had so many friends in quotation marks, but really I was just trying to fit in anywhere and everywhere, and I was the most popular lonely person, I reckon.
Yeah. Like Ellie was, she won't say it herself, but she was very popular at school and everyone loved Ellie, and for good reason. So
you might find that we quote Harry Potter quite frequently in this podcast.
Yeah. And for good reason. And so, yeah. And also because you got told by so many people, oh my God, Ellie's so cool and you're so popular. Oh, you're so good with people, Ellie. You felt like you kind of identified through that and sort of like, yeah, okay, I'm good with people. But then you felt really lonely inside. And you had lots of friends, but
I was actually just deeply a people pleaser, and it was all about me trying to find where I fit. It was me trying to understand different types of people. And really I was just an anxious mess who became a really good actor. And funny because another thing I do is I am an actor. Yeah. And I've now manifested that into like a small side career because I think I've been acting my whole life. And I just want to disclaim this and say, by the way, I'm still a very authentic, genuine person. I'm not fake in the way of like, I'm lying to you, but I definitely mold myself and people please. And I lack boundaries, which is another thing we'll get into eventually, is neurodivergent people and their lack of boundaries. It's really hard for us because we're so used to society telling us we're different, we're wrong, don't do that, you're weird for that, blah, 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 that we then lose our boundaries just to simply try and fit in.
Well, yeah, and also because I felt so lonely my whole life, and because I felt like I haven't fit in anywhere, I just let people treat me, or like, not that I let people treat me like awfully, but I will people please and I will not have an issue with things that does hurt me or upset me because out of the fear of losing them as a friend.
Yeah.
And
the cost comes to the individual when they're a good masker or undiagnosed. It all comes internally and it comes as a mental health issue in the end. I was diagnosed with anxiety and depression in my early 20s. Turns out I just had AuDHD and they didn't realize that. And I think that was what the root cause actually was.
Yeah. One thing, when I used to work in a workplace, it was literally kind of a joke because, not like taking the piss out of me necessarily, but that every second word of mine was, oh, sorry. Like it was actually a joke, and people would be like, oh my God, like, stop saying sorry. What's wrong?
Same.
And it's just like, I'm sorry for existing. Sorry for freaking breathing, because I'm terrified of rejection. RSD. That's another thing we'll get into later.
Rejection sensitive dysphoria.
Yeah. Do you want to say that again? Rejection sensitivity dysphoria.
There it is.
Ellie's a mumbler.
Shoot fast.
If I ever have talked about something, or like a friend had done something or whatever, you know, Ellie or my mum and dad would be like, why don't you blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, well, I don't want them to not like me.
Yeah.
It was,
It's
been crippling.
It has been really, really crippling. And yeah, the cost to the mental health is the biggest thing. And I think in terms of diagnosis, for me, medication, we'll get into that in another ep, but it helps some people and it also doesn't help others. Again, it's a different experience for everyone. But for me personally, my diagnosis, what it did for me was it gave me clarity and it gave me the most self-love I've ever felt in my life. I have way more patience for myself. I'm so much kinder to myself, and I actually embrace my quirks and I play to my strengths as opposed to trying to play to this world that wasn't built for me.
Yeah. And what society tells you is normal, quotation marks, because what even is normal? Shut the fuck up.
Exactly. Honestly, diagnosis or self-identifying that you might have something like this is literally life-saving. Yeah, I'm saying that with the most, the hardest stick in the ground. It is life-saving. It saves lives. And this is why we're doing this podcast. And again, if anyone says to you, oh, everyone's got ADHD now, just remind them that that's actually a great thing that people are finding out. Why are we seeing that as a negative thing? It's not a negative thing. It's a great thing. And it's because of lack of research. And we're finally starting to really talk about what it means, how it manifests differently in different sexes and environments and cultures, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So, yeah, I guess to sum up the first ep here, we are just two sisters doing this independent podcast for fun, but also trying to help educate people from our perspective.
Yes.
And we hope you get something out of it.
Yeah, we hope you enjoy, and
yeah. Thank you so much for tuning in, though, for our first ep. You can follow us on social media. WTF is AuDHD. And we're hoping we can build a little community eventually, and we can all just relate to each other and hang out. And yeah, we just hope that people can maybe start seeing themselves from a different lens, because trust me when I say 4 years ago, I never thought I had ADHD and I never thought I had autism. I genuinely never thought that those two things could compute in my mind because of the lack of education I had on that.
And because of your level of intelligence and masking all of your symptoms or behaviors, you gaslit yourself into out of thinking anything like that. And then you went and had, your thing, and then we'll get into that later.
We'll just rant for hours, but it's genuinely so interesting to realize that you are severely something like autistic or ADHD and you never even realized it, but instead all of that was converted into self-hatred.
Yeah. You have to say, and you beat yourself up going, why am I like this? Why did I do that? Why did I do that?
Yeah.
And so the biggest thing about diagnosis and self-identification is actually just being kinder to yourself.
Yeah.
Because
you only have your brain to live with. So we just want you to be nicer to yourself and hang out with us, and feel free to ask us questions on social media too if you want topics covered or you want to hear our perspective on certain things. We're so open to it. We want this to be an open discussion with everyone, because there's lacking, the research is lacking, the comms are lacking, and especially in New Zealand, there's not a lot of research, especially into the ADHD side of things.
Yes, and as we said, it's so expensive to go get a diagnosis. So this is a different avenue to have support if you're feeling like us or you think you might be. So thank you so much for listening, and we can't wait to be back next time.
Chat to you next time.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for tuning in today.